First and foremost, I just want to thank, Jessica for being here, the brains of the organization by far. Secondly, CityWorks for letting us present, but more importantly, the city of Philadelphia. I mean, they really went all in on this, and it was a very worthwhile effort, true benefits, and we want to go through some of that today. If there are more questions, feel free to get a hold of either one of us. Now, there's statistics on this page, there's numbers, but I think the thing that's very important to take into account, two components. One, you notice how many street trees there are. Second part of that is the pits. Now, when you look at an urban forest, it's very important to not only what's there, but what could be there. And when I say pits, there are an awful lot of empty tree pits in a city, or they maybe have a stump in them, or maybe they want to develop them. But every city is under an effort right now to green infrastructure. A lot of canopy coverage going on, especially in terms of equality across zip codes, for lack of a better term. Trees, when we think about them as an asset, and John from Wolpert, when you come back, just so you know, they are GASB eligible. Okay, so that's just something I want to mention to you. Trees typically get what? Planted, they grow, they get pruned, depending upon where they're planted. If they're planted in the right spot, asplund doesn't have to come and do a huge cut, but they can be pruned appropriately. They die and they're removed. A street tree in the city in an urban setting has a lifespan of about 25 years, roughly. So that tells you the turnover. First of all, they have a canopy spread of approximately 144 square feet. So if you take that, put that into acres, put that into miles, and look at it in the context of somewhere like Philadelphia, you will see how much they have and what they might need. Storm and emergencies are very important. There's a time during the year between, say, June and August in the mid-Atlantic where a tree just falls. There's no wind, there's no accident. It's called just tree drop. It'll fall. Sometimes it might fall at 3 in the morning. That means somebody has to come and clear the road, usually a Philadelphia Park member, or Philadelphia Park member come through, which we treat as projects. And one came through in November. I didn't think we were ready, but we did. They created the Emergency Operations Center. It's like being in Men in Black. Everybody's talking to each other. At the end, they aggregated all the costs and they were reimbursed by FEMA because we tracked the tree-related costs for PPR. So a lot of activity going on, a lot of things that we can talk about for ages, but we don't have time. Bottom left shows you 3 tree districts. There are 3 park districts. There are 5 tree districts, each treated and costed separately. In the middle are the over 400 and some thousand backlog activities. The city has a lot of backlog. They have 125,000 trees to be removed. They get funded to take away 70. So there's a big backlog over time. And finally, the inbox, which we used a lot for the CSRs, inspectors, arborists, it came in very, very handy. Boom. Secondly, challenges. Anybody on the call who works or is associated with a park and or recreation division or department, recreation will get some funds. You have gyms, you have playgrounds, you have pools. Parks, you're not going to get any money whatsoever, okay? Mow the lawn, pick up the trash, trim the trees so somebody doesn't poke out their eye. That's about it. So there's a lack of funding associated with parks that has to be overcome. CityWorks is a great way to start to benchmark that, measure it, to make a case for more money. Complex workflow. Believe me, you can sit here and say a park tree and a street tree, hey, not a big deal. This should be simple. No, there are a lot of decisions, funding. It's a very complex. Jess can tell you that for sure. Street and park trees are treated differently. It's a different story how they maintain it, how they track costs, how they do things. And finally, I just want to make a point here for everybody on the call, and some people know more than others what I'm talking about. Contract management is a very important component of many activities that take place within any organization. City of Philadelphia, 90% of their plant, prune, or remove, plant and prune, prune and remove work is operational capital funding. Trees are capital, planting is capital funding, a little bit of a different source, but they all have line items. They all have different costs based upon size. Those costs can change annually based upon a CPI. So if you want to do anything that everybody's going to love, batch update line items for a contract, and you're going to have a lot of friends. Second, we already have a lot of friends, but a lot of heroes. Secondly, opportunities. We had an entire inventory. Cyclomedia flew the city leaf on in about 2017. So we had all the points we needed. The end users, they were that demographic, 28 to 38. They get the technology. iPad's not a big deal. You didn't have to tell them how to use a mouse, okay? Worked real well. A lot of support from the city, many departments in the city, but in particular city geo, because we need a lot of GIS data, features, services, etc. We couldn't have gone forward. We couldn't have done a lot of the work we did without them. And then finally, with the go forward plan, this is what do they want to do next? Upgrade. Collectors going away. Field. How do we make dashboards for managers so they don't make 17 phone calls before somebody goes out to trim a tree on the Broad Street run? A lot of different ways to look at this. Boom. So solution, just want to mention a few things about this. Parks was the first AWS deployment in Philadelphia. Cloud was the big thing. Hey, let's do the cloud. This is going to be great. Okay, 4.5 years later, there's a lot of things we're having to take into consideration as a result of that. We did go down the, hey, mobile, respond, went mobile. Just so you know, this is back in about 2019, 2020. An important decision that we can obviously revisit. There were some contract workarounds we have to do, business processes. From the moment somebody calls a CSR, hey, I got a problem, till it's done, that can take a long time, permits, etc. A lot of reports, Jess can talk about that. A lot of great crystal reports that were put together. Then finally, from a staff standpoint, they had transition. For the same transition, there is an expansion going on underway about how people can use it. So being able to retrofit or retfit the end result for a certain user is very important. All right, Jess, gotcha. Sorry. I did my best to keep it light. Okay.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
Okay. And then finally, with the benefits, this is one thing I did want to mention, is that they now have a current idea of what's going on. They can make a case for new equipment. They can make a case for new staff. This is actually a very good thing for them to be more proactive. Secondly, I just want to mention with trees, there are the canopy, the CO2 sequestration, the water runoff retention. This is now can be used by the water department for some modeling. It can be used by the street department for when they either re-landscape and or have to rip out trees and figure out where to put them. Compliance, regulatory, John, you'll get to it in a second, but GASB, this can be used for capital expenditure. FEMA, reimbursement. There are going to be other things that will come up for permit grants, etc. But this will be a real benefit and provide a lot of unique and actual numbers and figures. Go ahead, Jess. What do we got? They now know what they have. Their inventory was like 7 years old. They thought they had a 4-inch. They thought they might have had a 4-inch, honey locust. It's a 17-inch different type of tree. So it's current. They can be proactive. A citizen can call and say, hey, can you come here? They can look at the system now and say, hey, for God's sake, you called 2.5 weeks ago. We were just out there. So they can start making better decisions. ISI, and the PMI down at the bottom. This whole concept of probability and consequence can play itself into urban forest. An old dead tree has a high probability of failure, and basically the consequence, it falls on an arterial that's in front of a fire station and nobody can get out. This can be used and be very good. And then KPIs, and now my friend you.
Okay, thanks, Peter. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about the technical side of our implementation with parks. Like Peter mentioned, we did weigh the mobile options. At the time, we had CityWorks Mobile and Respond, and we found that based upon the need for the simplified interface, which obviously you can accomplish with Respond and Style, but Parks was already using the Esri Collector app a bit. So being able to incorporate that in the mobile configuration was really ideal, and it really got us even closer with getting that end user acceptance, because we've started with this familiar interface. So I'm going to go ahead and step through this video here. So we had a couple things that we had to configure just specific to the park's needs. One in particular were the need for dynamic, not so much dynamic, but robust event layers. The mobile app by default will show you the work that's submitted to the user currently logged in. But with these guys, they needed to be able to go out and see not just their work, but also what's taking place around them. So am I about to go visit a tree that's already slated for contract work? Well, we don't want to do additional work if it's not required. And then the same with removal and pruning inspection. You don't want to put the effort into removing a tree or pruning a tree that's slated for removal. So we needed some additional layers involved to really let them do their work the way that they needed to. And then, like I mentioned, the ability to interface here with Collector, that was key to getting that acceptance. And there were a few configuration considerations we had to make, because at the time, this function here to auto filter text was not available in mobile. Really happy to see what Becky showed, because that is clutch. Especially in this case, like you can see here, you know, we're dealing with trees, obviously. So there's hundreds of tree names. And when you parse it out by species and genus and you know, tree, I mean, the list just goes on forever. So at the time, we did end up deciding to put that in the GIS, which really, I mean, it's an attribute of the asset, so it probably belongs there. But at the time, we kind of had to do that because that autofilter function wasn't available yet. One other customization that we did was for homeowner information. So when the staff are out in the field, either communicating with the person that maybe placed a request, they want to know that who the homeowner is and who they should be speaking with when it comes to decision making. Additionally, they have some leave behinds that they may fill out in the field, and they need to know who needs to be on that form. Ultimately, the homeowner is the only one that can make decisions when it comes to requests for planting and things like that. A renter can't make that decision. Okay. And like Peter mentioned, we did explore the contract line items for parks, but based upon their needs, it just really wasn't a good fit at the time. We still use contracts. We still use, you know, all of the attributes associated with contracts themselves, but just not the line items. We really needed the ability to batch update across many work orders. So what we did instead is we created line items out of materials, essentially. We didn't necessarily, I wouldn't say we repurposed materials, because you could still use these materials or use materials in the traditional sense, but we created material line items, and they're named according to district, asset, action, type of action, repair, remove, prune, plant, this kind of thing, and then your cohort. And the nice thing about Philly is that each district, each park district or tree district has one contractor working within that district. So we don't have a scenario where we have to average contractor rates across a district. We can update districts unique to whatever that contractor has adjusted their rate to. So for us, that worked really well. And we're able to track that actual cost, and using ELM here in the next screen. There it goes. There's a little advance button here that takes a minute. Okay, so using ELM, and specifically ELM here, we had to use because the regular material function in Office would not allow batch update at the time. So ELM was critical in this workflow. And here what we're doing is just selecting several work orders from the inbox. You could do the same thing if you were running an ad hoc search, or from an actual save search along that. But ultimately, the process of selecting many work orders, opening an ELM, and then by going to add contractor cost, we can add the number of line items required on one work order, and those will get applied to all the work orders. So what I mean here is, like, if we say we need one of these materials added, it's not going to take that one unit and spread it across 12 work orders. It's going to apply one unit to each work order selected. And I just think that's an important distinction to make. It's kind of even more user-friendly. Okay, back to you, Peter.
Yeah, I think, and first of all, just going back to Jess, what we came up with, and I say we in like, bizarre work married we, came up with, Jess, that was like fantastic. You know what I mean? That served the purpose of what we're looking for, and it's very complex because, as Jess mentioned, every district has a different cost per cohort depending upon the work. Center City, it's going to take a lot more to take down a 24-inch dead tree than it is in the far reaches of a more suburban community. So a lot of changes in dynamic. Lessons learned here, basically, I think the fact of, is workflows, really making sure we get the workflows both at a high level and then boil them down. The ones below are for like emergency and non-emergency, storm and events we had to take a handle on. Workflow, hands-on approach. We had we had the park employees and the street employees along with us every step of the way. So we made a mistake, they watched us, we said, whoops, we made it. Sometimes they came up with a solution. When you have them as part of the discussion, it's great. I have to be honest with you, being a landscape architect, understanding what they're talking about, having done this before, helps a tremendous amount. Now, it doesn't help on the technical side, but when you're talking about certain terminology, it's a tremendous thing, but it also allows us to be, not only an advocate, but be, educated, as well as have them sort of accept change when they understand if you can speak the same language. Demonstrate at the right level. We came up to the division, the commissioners, the managers. That was a much different presentation than we would do to the new end users who are going to be using this from soup to nuts. So there's lessons learned, and also knowing that there's always a tomorrow. Trees grow, trees appreciate, and there's a lot of technology and tools that keep coming, but also how can we leverage CityWorks, as best as possible. Next thing is there's a strategic plan coming up. Community Forest is looking at how to be equitable in terms of tree canopy coverage. And I guarantee to you that when you look at the city right now and where you see there is deforestation and there is a lack of tree coverage, there's a high coincidence between certain types of zip codes. More or less. And then finally, we want to help them continue and refine. We kind of left this saying we're done phase 2 and 3. Now it's time to turn the screws. You don't walk away and everything's tight. Let's start turning the screws to make sure it works. Then we can move forward in much more sort of like a larger informed step. Anyway, that's it. The next one's the questions. I can't emphasize enough the role Jessica played on this. I thank you tremendously. The role of Philadelphia and their willingness to have input in the meetings we had, large meetings that we had very frequently, and as well as CityWorks, your guys' role in supporting us here. So thank you all for the time and the effort.